The term communism was first coined in 1777 by French philosopher Victor de Huape. Decades later, the father of modern communism is born, Karl Marx. Communism soon became more than a political ideology, and it grew into a movement. It was soon portrayed as a way for the underrepresented and oppressed people who were abandoned by their government to gain back their power. Starting with the 1917 October Revolution in Russia, communist revolutions started to sweep the globe. The Cuban Revolution took place from 1953 to 1959 and was led by Fidel Castro, Raúl Castro, and Che Guevara. In the scope of the rise of communism, this revolution may seem small, but to the U.S., it mattered greatly. The United States was considered an enemy to the communist countries at the time, as it portrayed everything they were fighting against. During the Communist Revolution, the U.S. was partaking in the Cold War with Russia. Even though there was no bloodshed, this war proved dangerous for both countries and was the closest to nuclear war the world has ever gotten to. Che Guevara played an important role throughout the revolution and was a key part of Castro's government. Che's life was filled with controversy, and there can be a debate on whether or not he was a good or bad person. Che grew up in a corrupt Cuba, where there was an American-backed dictatorship thriving in Havana while the rest of Cuba was left in poverty. Most of the Cubans that did not live in Havana felt like their government had abandoned them, and they were uneducated and impoverished. To the Cubans, Che led a noble fight of replacing the Patokan village of a government with a fair and inclusive government built to help everyone. To the U.S. government, Che was a Russian-backed, warmongering communist bent on taking over the peaceful government of Cuba. Another controversial part of Che's life was his relationship with Tamara Bunke. Tamara Bunke, also known as Tanya, Laura, and Heidi, was one of the most important and cunning guerrilla fighters of the revolutionary Cuban government. She risked her life for the communist cause, going undercover in Bolivia to gather intel on the government leaders. Tamara was first introduced to Che Guevara at age 23 while working as a translator for Latin delegates in Germany. This one introduction would change the course of her life, opening her to the cause she would later give her life for. This documentary aims to uncover the truth behind who she really was, a dedicated woman with passion and high ambitions. While Tamara's story has always been hidden behind the stories of other male leaders of the revolution, her role cannot be ignored and deserves its own place in the history of Cuba. Tamara was born in 1937 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Her father was a Polish communist and her mother was a Russian Jew living in Poland. But with the Nazis taking over Germany, her parents were forced to flee to Argentina for their own safety in 1933. Tamara grew up in Argentina, later moving back to former East Germany in 1952. Tamara went to Humboldt University in Berlin to study political science and joined as many communist organizations as possible. Spanish journalist Joseba Elola describes Tamara as a diligent student, remarkably disciplined, dedicated, and extraordinarily bright. And her mother recounts Tamara as a serious student and devout communist. Tamara soon became a leader for the Free German Youth, also known as FYG, and became their official translator. Tamara traveled to Vienna, Prague, and Moscow, representing the FYG, and became a prominent voice of the communist community in Europe. Tamara was an extremely well-educated woman who spoke many languages, including Russian, French, English, Spanish, and German. While talking about Tamara, prima ballerina Alicia Alonso said, "Without a doubt, she was strong-willed. She had tremendous optimism, faith, and strong character." The director of the ballet, Fernando, explained that she talked about the Cuban Revolution and Latin America all the time. She asked all sorts of questions about the Cuban Revolution. It was obvious that she was up to date on what was going on in our country. In 1961, Tamara was finally able to pursue her dreams and move to Cuba, the country that was the height of her interests. During her time in Cuba, Tamara first focused mainly on volunteer work, teaching, and building homes and schools in the countryside along Che Guevara. Later, she worked with the Cuban Literacy Campaign, which aimed to abolish illiteracy in Cuba, until Che recruited her as a spy for his ill-fated guerrilla expedition to Bolivia called Operation Fantasma. In March of 1963, Tamara was offered the job and met the 3 officers who would be in charge of the mission for the first time. The first officer was Pinero, a rebel army commander, and the second was an MINIT officer simply called Poppy. And the third was Ulises Estrada, a Cuban journalist, ambassador, and guerrilla fighter. During the meeting, Pinero told her that the job involved significant risks and meant that she had to isolate herself from her family and friends in order to make the mission successful. Despite all of this, Tamara immediately said that further explanation was not necessary and that they could count on her to fulfill this mission for the Cuban Revolution without concerning themselves about the dangers she would have to face. Shortly after agreeing to the mission, Tamara's operational training in Cuba began. There, she learned how to receive secret messages as well as the different ways to make contact with other agents and outwit enemy surveillance. Tamara was also assigned a secret alias throughout her training, which she chose herself. She suggested Tanya as her nom de guerre, which was a subtle way for her to express her admiration for another woman who was also working as a secret agent, Zonia Kosomovodenskaya. With her operational training finished and her alias created, Tamara was ready for the most important job in her life, gathering intelligence from the Bolivian government to support a potential revolution in Bolivia. In October of 1964, Tamara finally arrived in La Paz, Bolivia to begin her mission. Tamara was able to relay the intel she would gather by posing as a radio host, giving encoded relationship advice to fictitious lovelorn couples. Tamara adopted the identity of Laura Gutierrez Bauer, a German-Argentine woman primarily interested in Bolivian folklore, and was able to become close to many important government officials using her ultimate weapon, her attractiveness to men. In an interview with the Sunday Times, one of Tanya's trainers for the mission, also known by his alias Benigno, describes Tamara's incredible dexterity during her mission in Bolivia. You could call her a Mata Hari. As a spy, she was one of the best. But I do not believe that she slept around. She did not need to. She knew how to manipulate men perfectly without doing that. Tamara was able to travel around the country and gauge the general feeling about the government by pretending she was in Bolivia to study folklore. As her time in Bolivia progressed, Tanya used a marriage with a young student to gain Bolivian citizenship and make her position more secure. Tanya was able to gather valuable intel, including information about U.S. ties with the Bolivian military and the location of key armed units. Another important role Tanya had during her time in Bolivia was laying the groundwork for the guerrilla network, as well as assisting with Che Guevara's arrival. Although this work threatened her cover, Tanya continued helping, confident that her cover could not be blown. Unfortunately, one fatal mistake led to Tanya's cover being blown. A captured Bolivian communist who was also staying at Nanchao Zoo gave away a safe house where Tanya's Jeep was parked, with the Jeep containing her address book. When Barrientos found out that she was spying for the Cubans, he ordered the walls of her apartment to be torn down. Tamara's stripped-down walls revealed a compartment filled with radio equipment Tanya used to send coded signals to Guerva, as well as documentation that would later lead Bolivian soldiers to Guerva's jungle hideout. Staying in La Paz was now impossible for Tanya, and she swapped her urban disguise for the uniform of a guerrilla fighter and joined Guerva in the jungle. After her cover was blown in 1966, Tanya had nowhere to go and joined Che's guerrilla force as a fighter. In April of 1967, Tanya and other members of Che's guerrilla force began to succumb to sickness caused by the Shiguo flea parasite. As more and more members were taken by the illness, Che decided to send a group of 16 alien combatants, including Tanya, out of the mountains. This one decision would ultimately lead to her death. At 5:20 p.m. on August 31, 1967, the guerrilla group heading to the mountains was ambushed while crossing the Rio Grande at Vado del Yeso by a CIA assistant Bolivian Army Ranger. Tanya, waist deep in the water, was holding her gun above her head when she was shot, the bullet going through her arm into her chest and killing her instantly. 8 other members of the group were also killed in the ambush, and 7 survived. After Tanya was killed, her body traveled downstream and was recovered by the Bolivian army 7 days later on September 6, 1967. When the news of Tanya's death first traveled to Che, he refused to believe she was dead, instead suspecting that it was army propaganda that aimed to demoralize him. Many years after her death, Fidel Castro declared Tanya the guerrilla a hero of the Cuban Revolution. To different people, Tamara was many different things. She started out as a charismatic political activist when she was a teenager and ended her life as a spy and soldier for the revolutionary government of Cuba. Throughout her life, Tamara was a passionate and strong-willed fighter battling for what she believed was right, all the while making new friends and pressing her interest in Argentine folk music, always playing instruments or dancing. Tamara took her interest of communist revolutions and turned it into a plan for life. She was able to pursue her dreams while keeping her beliefs and integrity. While Tamara's actions are generally seen as heroic, her actions can also be viewed as those of a communist puppet following orders. As journalist Christine Toomey says, to some, she was the heroine of the revolutionary struggle started by Che Guevara. To others, she was the manipulative Mata Hari who finally betrayed him. Although Tamara was killed in action and never truly recognized for her role in the Cuban Revolution, her actions would create a lasting impact on the people she was surrounded by, inspiring them to pursue their own dreams and stand up for their beliefs.